Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. So today I want to discuss mindlessness. Mindlessness, yes, it is a word. It is a term and it is something that we all actually have to deal with. So I want to talk about what is mindlessness and how does mindlessness actually affect our lives. So that's today's discussion. What is mindlessness and how it affects our lives? So, mindlessness, for example, think of this as one word I can use that to kind of give you an understanding of what mindlessness is and kind of think of it as that is clueless. Now, if you think of the word clueless, all right, it gives you an understanding of where I'm going with this and what mindlessness is. So also keep the word clueless in your mind as I'm discussing this whole idea of mindlessness and how it can affect our lives. So, in mindlessness, what happens is that we begin to process information passively, right? So, we begin to passively process information. Now, think of what the word passive means. If you're passive in the way you do something, it means that you're perhaps giving very little attention to something, right? So, in the context of what we're discussing, in the context of mindlessness, passive means that when information is flowing, right? When information is flowing and you are interacting with that information, what happens is you're not giving it your full attention. So, it's passive. Your approach towards the information is very passive, which means you're not engaging with the information. It's like being in a conversation or being a part of a conversation, but you're really not a part of it because the person is really having the conversation and you are passively listening, which means you're not listening intently, or you're probably more hearing than you are listening, right? If you're being very passive, what's actually happening is you're hearing what the person's saying to some extent, right? But you're not actively engaged in the conversation and what they're saying. So that makes you a passive listener. Well, it's the same thing with the flow of information. If you're receiving information passively, it means that you're not interacting and engaging with the information, which means that someone could be telling you almost anything and it becomes believable. It becomes believable. So, one of the key things about mindlessness is that you are not actively engaging with the information that you're coming across. People are telling you things, you're hearing things on the TV or the radio or whatever the case is, and it's kind of just going along. You're not really diving deep into understanding what you're hearing. Okay. Now, there's a reason for that. Mindlessness leads to a reduced amount of cognitive activity in our brains. Because what mindlessness does is it tells us that I already know enough, right? It tells us that I already know enough. So it's kind of like you flip a switch and you reduce the cognitive activity inside of your brain. And so with that reduced cognitive activity inside of your brain, it means again, passively, you're not paying attention to certain things, which means you now have much fewer thoughts, right? So with reduced cognitive activity, you have much fewer thoughts about certain types of things. So stuff's just kind of happening and you're just kind of just you're just there. You're just there. Just passively just there. You're not engaging with, again, what you're hearing, what you're seeing, the information you're receiving, radio, TV, newspaper, social media, whatever the case is, you're not actively engaging with that information, right? So you're turning off, not completely, but it's kind of like you've turned off a little bit some of your cognitive activity. It's kind of like your brain's gone into a lazy phase. And think about what happens if your brain goes into somewhat of a lazy phase. So, what happens when your brain goes into this lazy phase now is we then become uncritical of information. So we become very uncritical. We no longer have our critical lens on. We no longer have the microscope on and paying attention to detail the information that is coming across, call it your desk, so to speak, or across your brain, your mind. We're no longer paying attention to that in a critical lens. So we're no longer critically looking at information. And a lot of times these are the people that believe conspiracy theories. easily because they're not really thinking, right? They're not really processing things in a certain critical type of lens. And so they have a tendency to believe stuff. Remember, if you're being uncritical as far as evaluating certain bits of information, it means that you're not giving your full attention. Again, you're being passive. And when you're passive, you're not giving your full attention to something. And then a lot of times what happens is that very flawed information could come across your mind and you accept it as truth. So you have a tendency to accept things as more as being the truth because you're not being critical of the information. So basically, these are people who believe sometimes anything that people tell them. Just because this person is your friend, you believe what they say. Just because you've read something online, you believe what they say. You know, like sometimes people say, well, I saw it online, so I believed it. Well, that's not true. Or I saw it on Facebook, so it must be true if I saw it on Facebook. Now, that is not necessarily the case. What that means, what that tells me is that you are not critically thinking about the information that you see. So if somebody tells you that this is the color of whatever, you automatically believe that that is what it is because you no longer have your critical lens on. And so mindlessness leads to laziness, right? Mindlessness leads to a laziness of the brain. And, you know, a lot of times we love being able to just kind of do things in a pattern, right? We're creatures. And so if you kind of look at us human beings as creatures and the way we do things, is that you could almost predict sometimes where someone might be throughout the course of the day because we get into a routine so easily. And that's what mindlessness does. It creates this routine that we get into so easily. And then when you're in a routine, your tendency is to not think about certain things because you're so caught up in the routine. And why? Because you have reduced cognitive activity now. And so it leads to that mindlessness. And so you're not very cautious of your approach, or you're not thinking of things critically. That's why I said mindlessness leads to laziness. So now ask yourself, you know, have you allowed yourself to become so just carefree, to just believe anything that you hear someone say, to believe everything that you see on Facebook or everything that you see online, you think it's the truth, right? And that's how people get to spread conspiracy theories. They prey on people who are mindless, who are not critically thinking about certain types of things, and as they see, they believe. And they don't evaluate critically the information that comes across their minds, right? Comes across their desk, so to speak. I call it desk, but you know what I mean. The information that you're interacting with on a daily basis. And then where you get your information from is also critical as well. So that's what mindlessness is, right? It's really your brain getting into this relaxed state that you believe like you know what is supposed to happen, and every time you see something you just believe it. You're not critical of it because your brain becomes lazy. So let me know if you have ever struggled with mindlessness. How do you deal with it? And please feel free to ask your questions. I can go into this a whole lot more. Ask your questions and I can explain something more if you don't quite understand. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe. Please turn on your post notifications. Please share the videos. Please do not forget to hit the like button. That is very important as well as you sharing the videos. And until next time, peace.